The formation stood perfect and silent on the training deck of Station Vale 7, where the metal walls hummed with the vibration of distant engines, and the air tasted like recycled oxygen and fear. Kira Vance kept her eyes forward like the other recruits. Her boots locked to the deck plating as Instructor Dex Call moved down the line with his forearms folded behind his chitinous back. The Jarrell were impressive up close, and Dex Call was a prime specimen of his species, standing nearly 8 feet tall with an exoskeleton that gleamed like polished obsidian under the harsh white lights. His face was covered by the ceremonial mask all Jarrell warriors wore in public, a thing of carved bone and precious metals that marked him as a veteran of 3 campaigns. Kira had been on the station for 6 weeks now, and she still wasn't used to the casual way the Jarrell moved, like violence was just another language they spoke fluently. The other trainees in her unit represented the diversity of the Galactic Concordance. Vareth with his insectoid frame and multifaceted eyes, Som in her moisture suit that kept her aquatic skin from drying, 2 Kresh brothers whose scales shifted colors with their moods, and Yinter, whose crystalline body chimed softly when she moved among them all. Kira was the only human Earth had joined the Concordance only 15 years ago, and humans were still the newcomers, still proving they deserved to stand alongside species that had been exploring the stars for millennia. Thixel stopped at the tactical display and activated it with a gesture from his primary right hand. The hologram showed a standard building clearing scenario that Kira had seen variations of a dozen times before. Today we practiced the falling blade maneuver, Dexco said, his voice resonating through the translator unit mounted on his chest harness. Speed and aggression are paramount when breaching defended positions, and you will learn to strike before the enemy can mount a response. The hologram showed the team entering through a single point with their heavy hitters leading and support units following. Kira's eyes tracked the movements, and something bothered her about the formation. She had grown up on Threshold, a high-gravity colony world where every mistake could kill you, and where humans had learned to think 3 steps ahead of disaster. The tactical pattern Dex Call was showing left their right flank completely exposed for almost 4 seconds during the breach. 4 seconds was an eternity in combat. She knew she should stay quiet because Dex Call had made it clear in previous sessions that he didn't appreciate questions from junior trainees, especially not from humans. But those 4 seconds kept nagging at her mind like a loose thread that would unravel everything. Instructor, Kira said, keeping her voice respectful but firm, what happens if the enemy has a secondary position covering that right approach? The room temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. Thaxel's 4 eyes fixed on her through the mask's openings, and she could see the orange glow of his pupils intensifying. Recruit Vance, he said slowly, and there was something dangerous in his tone. Are you questioning tactical doctrine that has been proven across 17 species and countless engagements? I'm asking about the gap in our defensive coverage, Kira replied. And she kept her stance neutral, even though her heart was hammering. 4.2 seconds of exposure on the right flank during breach entry, and if they have even basic tactical awareness, she didn't see the Exco move one moment he was standing by the tactical display, and the next his secondary left hand had struck her across the face with what he probably considered a light corrective tap for a Drell. It might have been gentle, but the impact snapped Kira's head to the side and sent bright stars exploding across her vision. Her cheek felt like it had been hit with a metal bar, and she tasted copper in her mouth. Everything that happened next took less than 2 seconds, but Kira's mind processed it in crystal clarity. The hit triggered something deep in her brainstem, something that had been trained into her through 10,000 hours of martial arts practice on a world where gravity pulled 40% harder than Earth standard. Her hand came up in a reflexive counterstrike that didn't go for Dexka's armored torso or his arms. Instead, her fingers curled and her knuckles drove straight into the side of his ceremonial mask with every bit of force her high-gravity muscles could generate. The crack was like a gunshot in the confined space. The mask shattered along its left side, and fragments of bone and metal scattered across the deck. Platingfexicle's head rocked back in his forearms, flew wide in a defensive posture that came 1 full second too late. The room was absolutely silent, except for the pieces of mask still bouncing and settling on the floor. Kira's hand throbbed, and she could feel wetness on her knuckles, where the sharp edges had cut her. But she kept her eyes locked on Dexcall. The instructor stood frozen with his forearms still spread, and his face now partially exposed beneath the ruined mask. His mandibles worked, but no sound came out, and Kira realized with a cold shock what she had just done. Breaking HFY warrior's ceremonial mask was one of the gravest insults possible in their culture, and doing it in front of witnesses made it 10 times worse. "You struck me," Kira said quietly, and her voice didn't shake even though every nerve in her body was screaming. "I responded." Dexcall's hand moved to his comm unit, and within 30 seconds the training deck was flooded with security personnel. 2 crash guards took hold of Kira's arms while a HFY medic approached. Dexcall with a replacement mask. The other trainees had backed against the walls, and the Wrath's antennae were quivering with distress. Kira didn't resist as they placed restraints on her wrists, because there was no point in making things worse. But as they led her toward the detention area, she kept her head up and her shoulders back. She had seen the tactical recorder mounted in the ceiling corner, and she knew it had captured everything. Thexical had struck first, and she had responded with a speed that shouldn't have been possible. Guards pushed her into a holding cell, and the door sealed with a pneumatic hiss. Kira sat on the metal bench and examined her bleeding knuckles while her mind raced through the implications. She had just assaulted a superior officer and destroyed a sacred cultural artifact, but the look in Dexcall's eyes in that frozen moment told her something more important. She had moved faster than a HFY warrior could track. That should have been impossible. According to every xenobiology report and every tactical assessment the Concordance had on file, humans weren't supposed to be capable of matching HFY reflexes and reaction times. But Kira knew something the Concordance didn't know or had chosen to ignore. She wasn't from Earth standard gravity, and she wasn't trained in human standard combat doctrine. She was from Threshold, where children learn to move fast or die young, and where the martial arts weren't about sport but about survival against a world that wanted to crush youth. Cell's light panel flickered, and Kira leaned back against the cold wall. Whatever happened next was going to change everything, because the footage of that exchange would spread through the Concordance military network like wildfires. HFY had built their reputation on being the apex predators of known space, and that reputation rested on the assumption that no other species could match them in close combat. Kira had just shattered that assumption as cleanly as she had shattered Dexcall's mask. She smiled despite the pain in her face and the blood on her. And sometimes the most important thing you could do was show the universe that its assumptions were wrong. The interrogation room was smaller than Kira's cell, and the air was stale with the smell of fear from whoever had been questioned here before. Commander Vrelix sat across from her at the metal table, and his 4 eyes studied her with an intensity that made her skin prickle him like that skull. He wore no ceremonial mask, but rather a simple duty face covering that showed he was here in an official capacity. "Tell me what happened," Vrelix said, and his translator rendered his voice in a neutral tone that gave nothing away. Kira kept her hands flat on the table and her posture straight. Instructor Dexcall was demonstrating the falling blade breach protocol, and I identified a tactical vulnerability in the formation coverage, she said. When I asked about it, he struck me across the face with his secondary left hand, and I responded with a defensive counterstrike. Vrelix's mandibles twitched in what might have been amusement or irritation. A defensive counterstrike that destroyed his ceremonial mask. He said, "You do understand the cultural significance of what you did." I understand that I was attacked by a superior officer, and I defended myself according to my training. Kira replied, if Jrel culture prohibits questions in tactical briefings, then someone should have included that in the integration protocols. The commander made a notation on his datapad with one of his primary hands, while his secondary hands remained folded on the table. We have interviewed the other trainees in your unit, he said. All 6 of them confirm your account of the sequence of events, but they also confirm something else that is causing considerable discussion among the staff. Kira waited and kept her face neutral. They all say that you moved impossibly fast. Relic continued. Vareth claims your strike landed before Dexcal's primary arms could return the guard position and the crash. Brothers both insist that they didn't see your hand move at all, only the result. I trained in multiple Earth martial arts systems from the time I was 6 years old. Kira said, reflex conditioning is a fundamental part of that training. Relic's eyes narrowed slightly. The combat recorder data has been analyzed, he said. And he turned his datapad so she could see the playback. The footage showed the incident in brutal clarity. Dexcal's hand moving in a blur. The impact against Kira's face, and then her own hand snapping up faster than seemed physically possible. Numbers scrolled alongside the video showing frame-by-frame timing. 43 milliseconds from impact to counterstrike. Relic said, quietly, elite Jrel warriors average 45 to 50 milliseconds for combat responses, and human baseline is documented at 60 to 70 milliseconds. Kira looked at the numbers and felt something cold settle in her stomach. She had known. She was fast, but seeing it quantified like this made it real in a way that changed everything. I grew up on Threshold, she said. 1.4 standard gravities and an environment that killed about 30% of the first-generation colonists before we adapted. Adapted? Relic repeated, and he made another notation. Tell me about Threshold. Kira took a breath and organized her thoughts. Threshold has a denser atmosphere than Earth standard and higher gravity, which means everything weighs more and falls faster, she said. Children learn to move efficiently, or they get hurt, and we develop training methods to compensate for the environmental stress. And these training methods, Relic prompted, they're based on old Earth martial arts, but modified for high-gravity conditions. Kira explained, we focus on explosive movement and threat response patterns because in 1.4G, you can't afford to be slow. Relic was silent for a long moment while his eyes studied the data on his pad. There is a faction within Jrel Command that wants you expelled from service, he said finally. They claim that your actions represent a fundamental incompatibility between human psychology and Concordance military discipline. And what do you think? Kira asked. The commander's mandibles spread in what she had learned was a Jrel smile. I think that Dexcal made an assumption based on his species' superiority, and you proved that assumption wrong. He said, I also think that the Concordance has been making assumptions about humanity that need to be examined. He closed his datapad and stood with the fluid grace that all Jrel possessed. You will face a formal tribunal, he said. The charges are assault on a superior officer and cultural desecration, but I have reviewed the recorder data, and I believe the truth will speak for itself. After Relic left, Kira was returned to her cell, where she spent the next 3 days in isolation. Food came through a slot in the door, and the lights dimmed on a standard cycle, but nobody spoke to Kira. The 4th day they came for her with formal escort. The tribunal chamber was larger than she expected, with high ceilings and gallery seating, where observers could watch the proceedings. Representatives from each concordance member species sat on the judicial panel, and Kira recognized Ambassador Chun and Dr. Mabara from Earth's diplomatic corps sitting in the front row of the gallery. Advocate General Krex rose from the prosecution table, and his forearms spread in a formal gesture of accusation. Recruit Kira Vance stands accused of assault upon instructor Dex call and willful destruction of sacred cultural property. He announced in a voice that echoed through the chamber. These charges strike at the heart of military discipline and species harmony within the Concordance. Dr. Mabara stood for the defense, and his dark skin contrasted sharply with the pale blues and grays worn by most of the other species representatives. Recruit Vance acted in lawful self-defense against an unprovoked attack by her superior officer. He said clearly, furthermore, the incident reveals systemic failures in the integration protocols that have placed human personnel at risk. The tribunal chair, a Varith elder named Clicking Wind, gestured for both advocates to present their evidence. Rext showed the combat footage from multiple angles and brought forward Drell cultural experts who testified about the sacred nature of ceremonial masks. He painted Kira as a violent primitive who lacked the discipline required for military service. When Mabara's turn came, he called the other trainees as witnesses, and each one confirmed that Dex call had struck first. Then he brought forward Dr. Sarah Yoshida, a xenobiologist specializing in human adaptation. Humans are unique among concordant species in several key ways. Dr. Yoshida explained to the panel, we evolved as persistence hunters, which means we developed exceptional endurance and stress tolerance. And our threat response systems are remarkably sensitive. She displayed holographic models of human nervous systems alongside those of other species. When you combine these baseline traits with high-gravity adaptation, the results are individuals who possess reflexive capabilities that exceed standard human parameters by significant margins. She continued, Recruit Vance is not an anomaly, but rather a representative of a growing population of high-gravity colonists. Clicking Wind's antennae quivered with interest. Are you saying that all humans from high-gravity worlds possess these enhanced capabilities? The judge asked. Not all, but a significant percentage. Dr. Yoshida confirmed. We estimate that approximately 40% of threshold colonists show similar reaction times, and approximately 60% show enhanced endurance metrics. Krext objected strenuously, but the damage was done. Tribunal members were looking at Kira with new interest, and the whispers from the gallery suggested that the revelation was spreading fast on. The fifth day of the tribunal, Mabara made his boldest move. Recruit Vance request the opportunity to demonstrate human combat methodology. He announced Krext immediately protested, but Clicking Wind overruled him. An hour later, Kira stood in a training ring with 3 Drell warriors facing her. They were volunteers from the station garrison, and they moved with the confidence of apex predators who had never met their match. The rules were simple. Controlled sparring with impact monitors and safety protocols. When the signal sounded, Kira didn't try to match their strength or even their speed in direct confrontation. Instead, she used angles and leverage and the explosive movement patterns that Threshold had beaten into her bones. She ducked under strikes and redirected force and turned their own momentum against them. She didn't win, but she held her own for almost 2 minutes. Before they managed to pin hair in the gallery, someone started a slow clap, and others joined until the chamber echoed with applause. The Drell warriors helped Kira to her feet, and one of them touched his forehead to hers in a gesture of respect. That night, Relic came to her cell again. The verdict will be announced tomorrow, he said. But I thought you should know that Deskal has submitted a statement acknowledging that his strike was excessive. Kira nodded slowly. What happens after the verdict? She asked, the commander's mandibles spread in that smile again. That depends on whether the Concordance is ready to admit it was wrong about humanity, he said, and whether humans are ready to show us what they're really capable of. The tribunal chamber felt different on the day of the verdict, and Kira could sense the tension in the air like static electricity before a storm. She stood at attention before the judicial panel while Ambassador Chun and Dr. Mabara flanked her at the defense table. Clicking Wind rose from the center seat, and the chamber fell silent except for the soft hum of the environmental systems. This tribunal has reviewed all evidence and testimony regarding the incident between recruit Kira Vance and instructor Dexcal. The Varth judge announced, "We find that instructor Dexcal's strike constituted excessive force and violated protocols. Regarding appropriate disciplinary measures, Kira felt Diarmabara's hand briefly touch her shoulder in encouragement. However, Clicking Wind continued, the tribunal also finds that recruit Vance's response, while understandable as a defensive reflex, resulted in the destruction of sacred cultural property. The judge's multifaceted eyes fixed on Kira. Therefore, this tribunal renders a split verdict. Recruit Vance is acquitted of assault charges, but found guilty of cultural desecration. Murmurs rippled through the gallery, and Advocate General Crext's mandibles clicked in satisfaction. The sentence is as follows. Clicking Wind said, Recruit Vance will be reassigned to Strike Team Apex, an experimental joint operations unit, where she will serve under the direct command of Commander Vrelic. Kira blinked in surprise because that was not the punishment she had expected. Crext stood abruptly, and his forearms spread in protest. Strike Team Apex is a position of honor, he objected. This is no punishment at all. Strike Team Apex is also highly dangerous. Clicking Wind replied calmly, and it will require Recruit Vance to work in close cooperation with Drell warriors, including instructor Dexcal, who has been assigned as the unit's second officer. The judge's antennae twitched with what might have been amusement. If humans and Drell cannot find a way to work together in the field, then the integration program will be terminated and humanity's role in Concordance military operations will be permanently limited to support functions. Kira understood now, and the weight of it settled on her shoulders like a physical thing. She wasn't just being punished. She was being tested, and through her, all of humanity was being tested. Do you accept this assignment? Clicking Wind asked. I accept. Kira said, clearly 2 weeks later. Kira reported to Strike Team Apex's briefing room in full combat gear. Room was sparse with just a tactical table and chairs that could accommodate different species physiologies. Command Vrelic stood at the table with his forearms folded, and beside him was Dexcal, wearing a new ceremonial mask that bore a thin silver line where the old one had broken. 5 other humans were already present, and Kira recognized 2 of them from advanced training. Rotation's Marcus Webb was a tall man from New Darwin with the heavy musculature of a high-gravity worlder. Yuki Tanaka was small and quick with the kind of compact build that suggested speed over strength. The others introduced themselves as Chen Park, Isabella Okonkwo, and James DeVries. All of them were from colony worlds with non-standard gravity, and all of them had scored exceptionally high in combat assessments. Strike Team Apex has one mission, Vrelic announced without preamble, to prove that integrated human Drell units can be effective in real combat situations. He activated the tactical table, and a holographic image of a moon appeared above the surface. This is Krev 9, a small moon in the outer territories. Vrelic continued. Concordance Intelligence has confirmed that the Kraith Dominion has established an illegal research facility there. Kira studied the hologram and felt her tactical training engage automatically. The Kraith were one of the Concordance's major rivals, an aggressive species known for their brutal combat methods and contempt for treaties. What kind of research? Marcus asked. Bioweapons development, Dexcal said, and his voice carried an edge that made Kira look at him sharply. We have reason to believe they are specifically targeting Drell neurological systems. Vrelic gestured, and the hologram zoomed in to show the facility layout. Your objective is to infiltrate the facility, gather intelligence on their research, and if possible neutralize the operation, he said. This is a volunteer mission because the risk level is extreme. I volunteer, Kira said immediately, and the other humans echoed her without hesitation. Thexical. I studied each of them through his mask. The Kraith are apex predators. he said flatly. They are larger than Drell and more aggressive, and they do not take prisoners. Neither do we when our friends are threatened. Yuki said quietly. Something shifted in the room's atmosphere, and Kira saw Vrelic's mandibles spread slightly. The mission preparation took 3 days, and during that time, Kira found herself working alongside Dexcall more often than not. The first day was awkward, with both of them moving around each other like wary predators, but on the second day, while reviewing breach protocols, Dexcall suddenly stopped and looked at her directly. Your tactical observation about the falling blade maneuver was correct, he said. The right flank exposure is a known vulnerability, but Jarrell Doctrine considers it acceptable because our speed allows us to clear the fatal funnel before enemies can exploit it. Kira met his eyes through the mask. Human Doctrine would put a shield bearer in that position. She said, We can't match your speed, so we compensate with coverage. Dexcal's mandibles worked silently for a moment. Show me, he said. For the next hour, Kira walked him through human small unit tactics and the way humans used overlapping fields of fire and mutual support to compensate for individual limitations. In turn, Dexcal showed her Drell battle cant, the complex system of hand signals and body language that allowed Drell warriors to communicate silently in combat. You move differently than I expected, Dexcal said during a break. After the tribunal demonstration, I thought you would fight with aggression, but your style is more about redirection. Threshold taught me that you can't always meet force with force. Kira said, Sometimes you have to bend like grass in the wind and let the storm pass over you. We do not bend. Dexcal replied, We are the storm. And what happens when you meet a bigger storm? Kira asked. The instructor was silent for a long moment. We have never met a bigger storm, he said finally. That is why the Kraith concern us. On the third day, the team loaded onto the stealth transport that would take them to Krev 9. The ship was cramped with Drell, and humans packed into spaces meant for smaller crews. Kira found herself wedged between Marcus and one of Relic's combat specialists, a Drell warrior named Kreshtar, who smelled like metal and ozone. Journey took 16 hours, and during that time, the team went over the mission plan repeatedly. They would insert under cover of the moon's dust storms, breach the facility from an unguarded maintenance entrance, and split into 2 teams to cover more ground. Kira's team would consist of herself. Yuki, Dexcal, and Kreshta Marcus would lead the other team with Vrelic, remember? Vrelic said during the final briefing, The Kraith expect Drell tactics, and they have prepared countermeasures accordingly. His 4 eyes swept across the humans. That is why you are here, because you do not fight like Drell, and that unpredictability may be our greatest advantage. The ship shuddered as it entered Krev 9's atmosphere, and Kira checked her gear one final time. Her rifle was human-designed, but modified to interface with concordant systems. Her armor was a hybrid that combined Drell impact plating with human mobility joints. Beside her, Dexcal was checking his own weapons with the methodical precision of a veteran Vance. He said without looking at her, Yes, instructor? If we encounter Kraith forces, your human endurance may become critical, he said. Drell warriors can fight at maximum intensity for approximately 4 minutes before efficiency drops, and the Kraith have similar limitations. Humans can maintain combat effectiveness for much longer. Kira confirmed, but we're slower at the start. Then we will be your speed at the start, and you will be our endurance at the end. Dexcal said. He finally looked at her, and his eyes glowed orange in the dim light. This is how we survive. The ship touched down in a swirl of dust, and the ramp dropped open to reveal the barren landscape of Krev 9. Kira took a deep breath of the filtered air and stepped out into the storm behind her. The rest of Strike Team Apex followed, and for the first time since the incident in the training room, she felt like maybe they had a chance, not because humans were better than Drell, or because Drell were better than humans, but because together they might be something more than either species alone. The facility loomed in the distance, and somewhere inside were answers and enemies, and possibly the future of human-Jarrell cooperation. Kira checked her rifle one more time and moved forward into the dust. The maintenance entrance was exactly where intelligence had indicated, and Kira watched as Kreshtar bypassed the security lock with practiced efficiency. Door hissed open to reveal a dark corridor that smelled of chemical processing and something organic that made her stomach turn. Taught on point with his rifle up, and Kira followed 2 meters behind while Yuki and Kreshtar covered their rear. Facility was larger than the briefing hologram had suggested, and the corridors branched in ways that didn't match their maps. Relic's voice crackled in Kira's earpiece. Alpha Team has reached the primary research level, he reported. No contact yet, but we're detecting biological hazard warnings. Acknowledged. The X-Call responded. Beta Team is moving to the secondary level. They moved in silence using the Jarrell battle cant that the X-Call had taught them. Kira was impressed by how quickly Yuki had picked up the hand signals and how naturally the smaller woman moved in the low-gravity A. Door ahead slid open, and 3 Kraith warriors emerged with weapons already rising. Thexal and Kreshtar moved in perfect synchronization, and their rifles barked twice each. The Kraith were fast, but the Jarrell were faster, and all 3 hostiles went down before they could fire a shot. Contact. Next call reported calmly. 3 hostiles neutralized and breach is compromised. Alarms began wailing through the facility, and Kira felt her heart rate spike. All teams weapons free. Relic ordered. Complete your objectives and prepare for heavy resistance. They pushed deeper into the facility and encountered 2 more Kraith patrols in quick succession. The fighting was brutal and close quarters, and Kira saw firsthand why the Kraith had such a fearsome reputation. They were massive creatures with 8 limbs that could strike from multiple angles simultaneously. But Thexal and Kreshtar fought with a precision that was almost beautiful, and their forearms became a blur of strikes and blocks that the Kraith couldn't penetrate. Kira provided covering fire and watched the angles, while Yuki used her small size to slip through gaps and strike at vulnerable points. They reached the secondary research level and found row after row of containment cells. Most were empty, but some held bodies, and Kira's stomach clenched when she saw that many of them were Jarrell. We have found the test subjects. Thexal said into his comm, and his voice had gone flat in a way that worried. Kira Kreshtar moved along the cells, checking each one while Yuki covered the corridor entrance. This one is alive, Kreshtar called suddenly, and his translator couldn't quite mask the emotion in his voice. Thexal was at the cell in 3 long strides, and Kira followed inside. It was a Jarrell warrior who looked like death warmed over his exoskeleton was cracked in multiple places, and his forearms hung limply at his sides, but his eyes were still bright orange, and they focused on Thexal with desperate hope. Threlkin? Thexal said, and Kira heard something she had never heard before in his voice. Fear. Brother. The injured Jarrell whispered. You came. Kreshtar forced the cell door open, and Thexal moved inside to support his brood sibling. Kira's tactical training screamed at her that this was a disaster because an injured Jarrell warrior would slow them down impossibly. We need to move, she said urgently. Relic. Beta Team has a wounded Jarrell, and we need immediate extraction. Negative. The commander's voice came back. Alpha Team is pinned down in the primary lab, and the facility is going into lockdown. An explosion shook the floor beneath them, and dust rained from the ceiling. Facility self-destruct has been initiated. Relic continued. All teams extract immediately using any available route. Thexal looked at his brother, and then at Kira. She could see the calculation happening behind his eyes, and she knew what he was thinking. Sorrel honor demanded he stay with Threlkin, but Jarrell pragmatism said that was a death sentence for them all. We're not leaving him, Kira said before Thexal could speak. But we need to move fast. I cannot carry him and fight, Thexal said flatly. Kreshtar cannot carry him and fight, and your human strength is insufficient, then we don't fight. Kira replied, we run, and humans can run. She turned to Yuki, who was still watching the corridor. How fast can you rig a stretcher from our gear? 2 minutes. Yuki said without hesitation. Do it. Kira ordered, and then she activated her comm. Vrelic. Beta team is extracting with wounded, and we need a clear path to the north emergency exit. The north exit is through the main processing center. Vrelic said, you'll be running straight into the Kraith main force. Then we better run fast. Kira said, Yuki, finish the stretcher in 90 seconds using equipment webbing and support struts from the cell. They got Threlkeen onto it, and Kira took the front handles while Marcus, who had broken off from Alpha Team, took the rear. Here's how this works. Kira announced, Dexcall and Kreshtar, you're on point, and you clear the path, but you don't stop for anything. She looked at both Drell warriors. Your job is to move fast and hit hard, and our job is to keep up with you. You cannot keep up. Dexcall said, we're human. Kira replied, keeping up is what we do. They moved out at a pace that would have been sustainable for maybe 30 seconds by human standard gravity measures. But Kira had trained in 1.4G for most of her life, and the low gravity of Krev 9 felt like flying. Marcus matched her stride for stride, and behind them, Yuki ran backward, covering their rear with her rifle. Thexkol and Kreshtar were blurs of motion ahead, and they tore through the Kraith forces like a knife through paper. The Kraith tried to form defensive positions, but the Drell didn't give them time. They struck and moved and struck again and never stayed in one place long enough to be pinned down. Kira's arms burned with the effort of carrying the stretcher at speed, and her lungs felt like they were on fire, but she kept moving because stopping meant dying and dying meant failing. The corridor opened into a vast processing center filled with vats of biomatter and complex machinery. A dozen Kraith warriors were positioned throughout the space, and they opened fire the moment the team appeared. Contact heavy. Dexcall reported, we cannot break through. Yes, you can. Kira gasped. Just keep moving. She and Marcus angled the stretcher to use their own bodies as shields, and Yuki's rifle cracked steadily behind them. The Kraith were focusing fire on the Drell warriors because that's what their tactical doctrine demanded. But the Drell weren't stopping to fight back, and the Kraith hesitated in confusion. That hesitation cost them everything. Thexkol and Kreshtar hit the first defensive position like a sledgehammer and scattered the Kraith warriors. The team blew through the gap before the enemy could regroup too. More positions fell the same way, and then they were through the processing center and into the final corridor. The north exit was visible ahead, with daylight filtering through the gaps in the door. Another explosion rocked the facility, and this one was close enough to knock everyone off their feet. Kira hit the floor hard, and the stretcher tumbled from her grip. Marcus was up instantly, pulling Threlkin back onto the makeshift carrier. Kreshtar's leg was damaged, and he was moving with a pronounced limp. Go, he said to Dexcall. I will hold them. No, Kira said, and she hauled herself upright despite the ringing in her ears. Nobody holds anything, and we all get out or nobody does. She grabbed Kreshtar's arm and pulled it over her shoulder. The Drell warrior was heavy, but not impossibly so in the low gravity. Yuki, help Marcus with the stretcher, Kira ordered. Dexcall, you're on point again, and get that door open. They staggered forward as a group, and behind them, the Kraith forces were regrouping for a final push. Dexcall reached the door, and his forearms worked the emergency release. The door groaned and then swung open to reveal the dust storm outside. Move, 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 Kira shouted, and they spilled out into the swirling brown atmosphere. Stealth transport was waiting 200 meters away, and Vrelic was visible in the open hatch, waving them forward. Kira's legs felt like rubber, and her vision was going gray at the edges, but she kept moving. Beside her, Kreshtar was dead weight, and behind her, Marcus and Yuki were struggling with Threlkin's stretcher. Thexkol could have sprinted ahead and reached safety, but instead he stayed at Kira's shoulder. His Four arms reached out and took some of Kreshtar's weight. Together. He said, simply, the final 50 meters felt like 50 kilometers, but then they were at the ramp, and hands were pulling them inside. Transport lifted off, even before the hatch fully closed, and through the window, Kira saw the facility collapse. In on itself in a massive fireball, she slumped against the bulkhead and tried to remember. How to breatheth, Lithel was kneeling beside. Threlkin and his four hands moved gently over his brother's injurious. Vrek appeared and placed one hand on Dexco's shoulder. The medics are ready. The commander said quietly, "He will survive." Dexco looked up and his eyes found Kira across the cramped space. "You carried my brother out," he said. "You all did when I could not." "That's what teams do," Kira replied. "They carry each other." The medical bay on Station Vale 7 smelled like antiseptic and the particular chemical cocktail the Jral used to repair damaged exoskeletonsker. Sat on a bed while a medic treated the burns on her arms, and she watched Dex call through the transparent partition that separated the treatment areas. The instructor was still with his brother and had been for the past 18 horse. Thralkin was stable according to the doctors, but it would be weeks before he recovered fully. Marcus appeared in the doorway with his arm in a regeneration sleeve. "Commander wants to see us in the briefing room," he said. "All of us." The team assembled 20 minutes later, and Kira noticed that they all moved differently. Now there was a confidence that hadn't been there before, and a casual familiarity in how they positioned themselves around the room. Vralik stood at the head of the table, and beside him was Admiral Shenkra, the Jrel officer who commanded the entire station. Strike Team Apex has returned from KREV-9 with critical intelligence, the Admiral announced. "The data you recovered shows that the Kraith were developing neural toxins specifically designed to target Jrel and several other concordant species." She activated the tactical display, and holographic images of molecular structures appeared. The toxins were in final testing phase, which means a Kraith offensive was likely imminent. Shenkra continued, "Your mission has potentially saved thousands of lives." Kira saw several of her teammates sit up straighter at that. "Furthermore," the Admiral said, and her mandibles spread in what Kira had learned was approval, "your extraction of wounded personnel under combat conditions demonstrates that integrated units can be effective even under extreme circumstances." Vralik stepped forward. "The Concordance Military Council has authorized expansion of the integration program," he said. "Human personnel will no longer be restricted to support roles, but will be incorporated into frontline combat units." Yuki let out a whoop and Marcus grinned broadly. But Kira was watching Dexcal, who had entered the room quietly and was standing against the back wall. The instructor's new mask bore decorative elements that Kira didn't recognize, and when he caught her looking, he moved to stand beside her. "I have something for you," he said quietly. He reached into a pouch on his harness and withdrew a piece of carved bone and metal. Kira recognized it immediately as a fragment of his original mask. The one she had broken, but it had been repaired with thin lines of what looked like human-style metal joining. In Jrel culture, when a warrior breaks another's mask in honorable combat, they are bound together. Dexcal explained, "This piece represents that bond, and I am giving it to you." Kira took the fragment carefully and felt the weight of it in her palm. "I don't understand," she said. "You showed me that strength takes many forms," Dexcal replied. "Jrel warriors are taught that speed and power are supreme, but you moved as fast as any Jrel, and yet your greatest strength was not speed but endurance." His four eyes studied her. "You carried my brother when I could not, and you kept moving when stopping. Would have been easier, and that is a kind of strength we Jrel have forgotten." He touched his new mask. "I wear this to remember that lesson." The briefing concluded with congratulations and new assignments. Strike Team Apex would become the template for integrated units, and each member would be assigned to train new teams. Kira was promoted to sergeant and given command of the first fully integrated combat unit. 3 weeks later, she stood in the training facility where everything had started. Room had been reconfigured to accommodate both human and Drell trainees, and a new class of recruits stood at attention before her. Among them were humans from Earth and from colonies like Threshold and New Darwin. There were also Drell warriors, who had volunteered for integration training, and several other species, who wanted to learn the new combined tactics. Thexical stood beside her as co-instructor, and together they had designed a program that drew from both human and Drell combat. Philosophy: combat is not about being the strongest or the fastest, Kira announced to the new recruits. It is about using what you have to maximum effect and supporting your team so they can do the same. She walked down the line and stopped in front of a young human woman who looked nervous. "You," Kira said. "What is your name?" "Recruit Sarah Chun." The woman replied. "Where are you from?" "Earth Standard Gravity." Chun said. Kira nodded. "That means the Drell standing next to you is faster and stronger than you in direct confrontation," she said. "Does that make you useless?" "No, Sergeant," Chun replied with more confidence. "It means I need to be smarter." "Correct." Kira said. She moved to a Drell recruit. "And you," she continued. "The human standing next to you can maintain combat effectiveness 3 times longer than you can, and can recover from injuries that would cripple you for weeks." The Drell recruit's mandibles spread. "This makes us stronger together," he said. "Exactly." Dexcall added, "Individual supremacy is a myth, and the only supremacy that matters is the supremacy of the team." Over the following weeks, Kira watched the new recruits struggle and grow. The humans learned Drell battle cant and striking techniques, while the Drell learned human endurance training and adaptive tactics. There were conflicts, of course, because putting different species with different instincts together was never easy, but slowly, Kira saw the same transformation that had happened with Strike Team Apex. The recruits stopped seeing themselves as human or Drell or Vareth and started seeing themselves as Soldiers 1. Evening after a particularly grueling training session, Kira stood on the observation deck, overlooking the station's main hangar. Below her, dozens of ships moved in careful coordination, and she could see mixed species crews working together with practiced efficiency. Dix joined her at the railing, and for a while they stood in companionable silence. "Do you remember when I asked you how you move so fast?" he said finally. "I remember," Kira replied. "You told me that humans don't try to be the best at what Drell are best at." Dexcall continued. "You said you find the gaps and make them yours." He gestured at the hangar below. "I think I finally understand what you meant, and it was never about speed or strength or any single attribute." "What was it about?" Kira asked. "Adaptation," Dexcall said. "Humans adapt to everything, and you turn your weaknesses into strengths, and you never give up even when giving up would be reasonable." His mandibles spread in a smile. "The Drell thought we were the apex because we were fast and strong, but we forgot that the true apex predator is not the one who's strongest in one moment, but the one who survives long enough to see the next moment." Kira thought about Threshold and the colonists who had died in the early years, and the ones who had survived by changing and adapting. She thought about the martial arts masters who had modified Earth techniques for high gravity, and the engineers who had redesigned everything from buildings to farming equipment. "We learned that the hard way," she said. "When we went to the stars, we weren't the strongest or the smartest or the fastest. And we certainly weren't the most advanced." She looked at Dexcall. "But we were stubborn enough to keep trying and flexible enough to change, and that turned out to be enough." Below them, a transport ship lifted off carrying a mixed crew of humans and Drell to their first joint deployment. Kira had received reports that other concordant species were requesting human advisors and trainers. The Vareth wanted to learn human endurance techniques, and the aquatic Solm were interested in human problem-solving methodologies. Even the crystalline Yinter had sent observers to study how humans approach tactical challenges. The galaxy is changing. Dexcall observed, because of what happened between us. Because we both chose to change. Kira corrected. You could have maintained that humans were inferior, and I could have maintained that Drell were arrogant, and we both would have been right. And both would have been wrong. She turned to face him fully. Instead, we decided to see what we could learn from each other, and that made all the difference. Dexcall reached up and touched his mask where the repair lines were visible. I keep this mask as a reminder, he said. Not of the day you broke it, but of the day we both began to understand that strength and honor are not the exclusive property of any one species. He pulled something from his harness, and Kira saw it was a small case. I have made something for you as well, he said. Inside the case was a new piece of the broken mask, worked into a pendant with both Drell and human design elements. Wear this and remember that you helped change the concordance. Dexcall said, not through force or conquest, but through showing us what we had forgotten to value. Kira took the pendant and fastened it around her neck. It rested against her chest, where she could feel its weight with every breath. 3 months after the Krev 9 mission, the Concordance Military Council issued new guidelines that fundamentally restructured how integrated units would operate. Human personnel were now incorporated at every level, from basic training through elite special operations. The old hierarchy that placed Drell at the apex was quietly retired and replaced with a doctrine that emphasized complementary capabilities. Admiral Shenkra announced the formation of 10 new integrated strike teams and requested that Kira and Dexcall lead the training program in the training facility where it had all started. A display now hung on the wall.